Billionaire dad goes to school and sees a homeless girl teaching his daughter math. What he does next is unbelievable. The day started as always for Emily. The sky still dark, the air cold in the early morning. She woke up wrapped in her thin blanket, under the small awning that had become her shelter in recent weeks. At 5 years old, she already knew the routines of the streets well. With small, nimble fingers, she adjusted her faded dress, too big for her thin body, and tried to smooth her brown hair that kept falling over her eyes. Emily then organized her worn backpack, the last gift she had received from her mother. Inside, she kept her treasures, a few pencils found on sidewalks, blank pages collected from trash bins, and discarded notebook scraps that still had usable pages. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her of hunger. Emily opened a small packet containing half a bread roll she had managed to get the night before. A man from the bakery sometimes left something for her at the end of the day. She ate slowly, savoring each piece. On the streets, she had learned it was important to make food last. For 8 months, Emily had been living alone. Before that, she and her mother would beg together at city intersections. Emily remembered her mother's gentle smile, even on days when hardly anyone stopped to help. She remembered how they would sleep cuddled together to ward off the cold, how they would share every bit of food they managed to get. "We're rich in other ways, Emily," her mother would say when her stomach growled with hunger. Then came the cough, then the fever. One night, Emily slept cuddling her mother under an overpass, and the next morning she couldn't wake her up. People passed, some stopped. A man in a uniform called an ambulance, but it was too late. Nobody came back for Emily. The only thing that remained from those days were the lessons. Even living on the streets, her mother insisted on the importance of learning. "Reading is like having wings, Emily," she would say on nights when, by the light of found candles, she would trace letters in the dust or on pieces of cardboard. "With wings, you can fly far from here." That's how Emily learned her first letters. Her mother never said how she knew how to read so well. It was a mystery Emily carried with her. When her mother passed, she decided to keep learning, as a way to keep her close. In the trash bins behind schools and libraries, Emily found real treasures: books with torn pages, used notebooks, old magazines. At night, under the streetlights, she practiced. Letters turned into words. Words formed sentences, and a new world opened up. Carefully packing her belongings in her backpack, Emily began her morning walk. She knew every alley, every shortcut in the city. She knew where it was safe to pass and where she should avoid. She knew which trash bins might contain good food and which people on the street posed no danger. 15 minutes later, she reached her favorite destination, St. Thomas School. The imposing building stood behind a tall fence. Emily found her usual spot, a hidden corner behind a leafy tree from where she could see the main gate without being noticed. She sat down and waited, as she had done every morning for months. Soon the first cars began to arrive. Shiny, large vehicles, very different from the crowded buses that sometimes offered temporary shelter on rainy days. From inside them emerged children in immaculate uniforms, white shirts, navy blue skirts or pants, shoes without a single scuff. They carried colorful backpacks and lunchboxes, decorated with characters Emily recognized from discarded magazines. Emily observed every detail: how parents would bend down to give goodbye kisses, how children would run to meet friends, how they laughed and talked about things she didn't fully understand. Some children complained about having to wake up early or do homework. Emily couldn't understand how anyone could complain about something so precious. "I forgot to do my math homework," a boy said worriedly. "Today we have art class," a girl with braids exclaimed, skipping. The bell rang, a sharp sound Emily already knew well. The children formed organized lines and entered the building. In a few minutes, the courtyard was empty, and a different silence took over the place. Emily moved a little closer to the fence, her small fingers holding the cold bars. She couldn't see inside the classrooms, but her imagination created the rest. What would it be like to sit in a real chair with a desk just for her? What would it be like to have a new notebook without stains or tears? What would it be like to raise her hand and ask questions when she didn't understand something? In her mind, she created images of colorful rooms with maps on the walls and books on shelves. She imagined a kind teacher writing on the board, explaining wonderful things she didn't know yet. She imagined making friends, talking during recess, sharing snacks. "I would learn fast," she whispered to herself. "I know I could." Hours passed, and Emily remained there. When the sun became too strong, she changed positions, always careful not to be seen by the adults who sometimes patrolled the school perimeter. In the middle of the day, she heard another bell. Soon, the courtyard filled again with children running, playing, eating snacks that looked delicious. Emily watched the groups that formed, the games they shared, the laughter that echoed through the air. Her gaze was dreamy, silent. There was no envy or bitterness, just a deep desire to belong, to be part of that world that seemed to exist in another dimension, separated from her only by a fence, but as distant as the stars. Sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, Emily took one of her found notebooks from her backpack and practiced what she had learned on her own. She wrote letters, numbers, copied words from her patched-up books. She used the dirt ground as a blackboard when paper ran out. Once, she found an almost complete math book in a trash bin. It took her weeks to decipher the problems, counting on her fingers, drawing on the ground to understand. When she finally solved her first two-digit addition problem, she felt immense joy. In the afternoon, when classes ended, Emily watched the dismissal. Children ran into their parents' arms, showed papers with gold stars, talked animatedly about their day. Emily waited for everyone to leave before emerging from her hiding spot. On her way back to her shelter, she collected anything useful: a forgotten pencil, a fallen leaf, a discarded piece of chalk, small treasures to continue her solitary studies. That night, like all others, Emily sat under the faint light of a street lamp. She opened a storybook with missing pages that she had recently found. She read aloud, imagining what it would be like to hear these stories in a teacher's voice, surrounded by other children. When sleep came, Emily put her belongings in her backpack and hugged it to her chest. She wrapped herself in her thin blanket, lying on the cardboard that separated her from the cold ground. "Tomorrow," she whispered, as she did every night. "Tomorrow might be different." And she fell asleep, a small solitary figure under the starry sky, dreaming of a world on the other side of the fence. The morning began like all others for Emily. Breakfast was half an apple found in a park trash can and the rest of the previous night's bread. After tidying her few belongings, she began her daily walk towards St. Thomas School. Something felt different that morning. The sky was especially blue, cloudless, and a gentle breeze swayed the tree leaves. Emily followed her usual route, but her steps were lighter, as if something was pulling her forward. Upon reaching the school, Emily found her usual spot behind the tree. Cars began to pull up. Children entered as on every other day. The bell rang. The playground became empty. But today, she noticed something she had never seen before. A small opening in the side garden, where the fence was lower and partially covered by flowering bushes. Emily looked around. No adults in sight. The security guard who usually patrolled the perimeter was busy helping unload boxes at the main entrance. It was now or never. With her heart pounding, Emily approached the opening. She crouched down and carefully slipped through the bushes. Her hair snagged on some branches, but she didn't mind. In seconds, she was on the other side, inside the school for the first time. The garden was even more beautiful from the inside. Colorful flowers in well-maintained beds, trees offering cool shade, the grass so green and soft under her bare feet. Emily stood still for a moment, just feeling. It was like entering one of the magical worlds from the books she found. The sound of a sob broke the enchantment. Emily turned towards the noise. On a wooden bench, partially hidden by a bush, a girl her age was sitting. She wore the school uniform, white shirt, navy blue skirt, and had blonde hair tied in two perfect braids. She held an open notebook and looked frustrated. Emily hesitated. Should she hide? Run back to her side of the fence? But something in the girl's expression made her approach. With silent steps, Emily got close enough to see what the girl was looking at with such concentration. It was a math worksheet. Simple addition problems. The kind Emily had learned in one of the discarded notebooks she'd found. The girl looked up, startled to notice Emily's presence. For an instant, they just stared at each other. Two 5-year-old girls, so different and yet so alike. "Who are you?" the girl asked, quickly wiping away a tear. "I haven't seen you in our class." Emily swallowed hard. Should she run? But those blue eyes showed no fear or anger, just curiosity. "My name is Emily," she replied in a quiet voice. I don't study here." The girl frowned, confused. "Then what are you doing here, and why are your clothes so dirty?" Emily looked down at her faded dress, suddenly aware of the stains and small tears. She felt her face flush with embarrassment. "I just wanted to see what a school looked like inside," she murmured, taking a step back, ready to run. "Wait," the girl said. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. My name is Sophie." Emily stopped. Sophie smiled shyly and patted the empty spot next to her on the bench. "Want to sit? I'm trying to do this homework, but it's really hard. The teacher will be mad if I don't finish." Emily approached cautiously and sat on the edge of the bench. She peeked at Sophie's notebook. "35 amboyas" was written on the first line. Sophie had made several tally marks next to it, trying to count. "Can I help?" Emily offered. "I know how to do sums." Sophie looked surprised. "You do, but you don't study here." Emily smiled for the first time. "I don't need to study here to know. Can I show you?" Sophie pushed the notebook towards Emily, who carefully picked up the pencil as if it were something precious. "Look, it's like this," Emily explained. "You have 3 fingers here, right?" She held up 3 fingers on her left hand, and 5 more here. She held up all the fingers on her right hand. "Now count them all together." Sophie counted her fingers one by one. 1, 2, 3, she continued until the last finger. 8. The answer is 8. "That's right," Emily smiled. "Now try the next one by yourself." Sophie looked at the next problem, 4 plus 2. She held up 4 fingers on one hand and 2 on the other, counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's 6. "See, you can do it," Emily encouraged. Sophie's eyes sparkled. Quickly, she solved the next problems with the help of her fingers, exclaiming happily each time she found the answer. "How did you learn that?" Sophie asked, genuinely curious. "You're so smart." Emily hesitated. No one had ever told her she was smart except her mother. "I learned by myself. With books, I find. By yourself. Without a teacher." Sophie seemed amazed. "I couldn't do that. You must be like those genius kids on TV." Emily laughed, a soft sound she rarely heard herself. "I'm not a genius, I just like to learn." The two continued talking. Sophie told her about her teacher, her classmates, the music classes she loved. Emily listened with fascination, absorbing every detail of this world she only knew through the fence. "Where do you live?" Sophie eventually asked. Emily looked away. Around where?" "In different places. Depends on the night." Sophie frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "You don't have a home." Before Emily could answer, they heard approaching footsteps. A woman in a school uniform appeared around the corner of the garden. When she saw Emily, her expression changed. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" she asked in a firm voice, approaching quickly. Emily jumped up, ready to run, but Sophie held her hand. "She's my friend, miss." "Peterson," Sophie explained. "She helped me with math." The staff member looked Emily up and down, noticing her worn clothes and bare feet. "This area is for students and staff only," Mr. Peterson said, her voice softer but still firm. "I'll have to ask you to come with me to the principal's office." Panic surged in Emily's chest. Principal's office meant trouble. Trouble meant police. And police meant she didn't even want to think about it. "Please, she was just helping me," Sophie insisted, still holding Emily's hand. "I'm sure she was, dear, but there are rules." "Is there a problem here?" A new voice joined the conversation. A tall man in a dark suit with brown hair approached the group. His eyes, Emily noticed, were identical to Sophie's. "Mr. Miller," the staff member greeted. "I was just dealing with a situation. This girl entered school property without authorization." "Daddy!" Sophie exclaimed, running to hug the man. "This is my new friend Emily. She's super smart. She taught me how to do sums on my fingers. Mr. Miller, David, looked at Emily with curiosity. His eyes scanned her worn clothes, her messy hair, her bare feet. But unlike many adults Emily had met on the streets, his gaze held no disgust or contempt, only a gentle curiosity. "Is that right?" he asked, bending down to his daughter's height. "So that's wonderful that you found such a good teacher." The staff member cleared her throat. "Mr. Miller, even so, we need to follow protocol. We don't know how she got in and—" "It's fine," David interrupted with a polite smile. "I'll handle it." Mrs. Peterson looked uncertain. "Are you sure?" "She's clearly not a student and we need to—" "I'm sure," David affirmed firmly, but still smiling. "I'll take full responsibility. Thank you for your concern, Miss Peterson." The staff member hesitated for another moment, then nodded and walked away, not without casting one last suspicious glance at Emily. David turned to Emily, who remained motionless, ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. "So you're the famous Emily," he said, extending his hand as if speaking to an adult. "I'm David, Sophie's dad. Thank you for helping my daughter." Emily looked at the outstretched hand with suspicion. After a moment, she shook it briefly. "It was nothing," she murmured. "Daddy," Sophie said, "can we take Emily for a snack? Please? She helped me so much." David looked at his watch, then at his daughter, and finally at Emily, whose stomach chose that moment to audibly rumble. "You know what? That's a great idea," he said with a smile. "Sophie, have you finished your homework?" "Yes." "Emily taught me everything." "Then let's go." David picked up his daughter's backpack. "I know a great diner nearby." Emily stood still, not understanding. I can leave. I don't want to cause trouble." "What trouble?" David asked gently. "Sophie finished her homework. You helped. And a snack is a good way to say thank you." "What do you think?" Sophie took Emily's hand. "Please, come, they have the best milkshakes in the world." Emily looked at Sophie, then at David. Something in those kind eyes made her relax a little. "Okay," she agreed in a low voice. "Thank you." As they walked towards the gate, they passed other staff members who looked curiously at Emily. A security guard approached. "Mr. Miller, this girl isn't a student. How did she get in here?" "Don't worry, Carl," David replied calmly. "She's with me and Sophie. We're just leaving." "But, sir, we didn't see her come in, and—" "It's fine," David repeated firmly. "I'll handle it." The security guard hesitated, then nodded and opened the gate for them. The diner was only 2 blocks from the school. It was a cheerful place and with red booths and a jukebox playing soft music. Emily looked at everything with wide eyes. She had never been in a place like this before. David chose a table near the window and helped the girls sit down. A smiling waitress approached. "Hi, Mr. Miller." "And hello, Sophie." "Who's your little friend?" "This is Emily," Sophie replied excitedly. "She's my new friend and she's super smart." "Nice to meet you, Emily," the waitress smiled. "What can I get you today?" "The usual for Sophie and me," David said. "And for you, Emily, what would you like to eat?" Emily looked at the menu with colorful pictures, unsure what to choose. Everything looked wonderful. Anything is fine," she mumbled. "How about a burger with fries and a chocolate milkshake? It's Sophie's favorite." Emily nodded, unable to believe her luck. While they waited for their food, Sophie talked non-stop about school, her friends, her favorite classes. Emily listened, fascinated, occasionally asking questions. David observed their interaction, impressed by Emily's intelligence and maturity in her comments. When the food arrived, Emily's eyes widened. She had never seen such a large burger or such golden fries. The milkshake, topped with whipped cream and a cherry, looked like it came out of one of the illustrated books she sometimes found. "So go ahead," David encouraged, noticing her hesitation. "It's all right." Emily carefully picked up the burger and took a small bite. The flavor exploded in her mouth, and she couldn't help but make a small sound of pleasure. "Good, isn't it?" Sophie asked, already with ketchup on her chin. Emily nodded, unable to speak as she savored each bite. "So, Emily," David began after she had eaten a bit, "Sophie told me you helped her with math. Where did you learn to do sums so well?" Emily took a sip of her milkshake before answering. "My mum taught me a little. The rest I learned by myself. By yourself. David seemed genuinely impressed. How? I find books and notebooks that people throw away. I read and practice. David exchanged a quick glance with Sophie, who was observing the conversation with interest. And your mother? Does she not continue teaching you? Emily's face darkened. She died 8 months ago. A silence fell over the table. Sophie looked at Emily with wide eyes. I'm so sorry, David said sincerely. And your father? Never met him. Who do you live with then? Emily shrugged. Alone. Alone? David leaned forward, concern evident on his face. You mean you live on the street? Emily nodded, biting into a French fry. There was no shame in her answer, just acceptance of a fact. But you're so small, Sophie murmured, looking sad for the first time. Aren't you scared? Sometimes, Emily admitted, but I learned where it's safe to sleep and where to get food. It's not so bad. David seemed to be processing the information, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of perturbation. Emily, how did you get into the school today? Through the garden. I saw an opening in the fence. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have. She looked down. I just wanted to see what it was like inside. Every day I look through the fence. You come every day to look at the school? David asked, surprised. Emily nodded. I like to see the children learning. I imagine what it would be like to be there. Sophie placed her hand on Emily's. You can come study with me. Can't she, Daddy? David smiled sadly. It's not that simple, honey, but... He looked at Emily with curiosity. Would you like to study there, Emily? Emily's eyes sparkled. More than anything, she replied with complete sincerity. More than anything in the world. The girls finished eating, Emily savoring each bite as if it were her last. When the plate was empty, she carefully wiped her hands on the napkin, imitating the gestures she had seen Sophie make. Thank you for the snack, she said politely, looking David in the eye. That was very kind of you. David smiled, touched by the little girl's politeness. It was my pleasure, Emily. And thank you for helping Sophie with her homework. Emily gave a small smile, adjusted her worn backpack and stood up. I need to go now. Do you really have to go? Sophie asked, disappointed. We could play more. Emily hesitated, looking at David. Maybe another day, she replied softly. David also stood up, leaving some bills on the table. Can I walk you to, well, wherever you want to go? Emily shook her head. You don't have to. I know the way. Will we see each other again? Sophie asked, hopeful. Emily looked at the girl with perfect braids and clean clothes, so different from her but who had somehow become her friend for a brief moment. Maybe, she replied with a small smile. With a final thank you, Emily turned and left the diner. David and Sophie watched her through the window as she walked down the sidewalk, a small, solitary figure who soon disappeared into the crowd. David remained silent, watching the spot where Emily had disappeared. His face reflected a mix of emotions that Sophie didn't fully understand. After a moment, he took a deep breath and took his daughter's hand. Let's go, Princess. It's time to head back. Meanwhile, Emily walked through the familiar streets, her steps lighter than they had been in months. The taste of the burger and milkshake still lingered in her mouth, and sweeter still was the memory of having been treated, for a few hours, like any other normal child. Just for today, she whispered to herself, a small smile on her lips. Today was different. The miller's house was in a quiet neighborhood, with tree-lined streets and well-kept gardens. It was a 2-story residence, with large windows and a swing set in the backyard. The perfect place to raise a child, David thought when he bought it after his wife Claire's death 3 years ago. That night, after the unexpected encounter with Emily, David returned home earlier than usual. Normally, he worked late at the law firm where he was a partner, arriving home when Sophie was almost asleep. But today, something prompted him to leave at 6 o'clock sharp, cancelling his last meeting. Sophie was in the living room, playing with dolls under the supervision of Ms. Peterson, the nanny who looked after her after school. When she saw her father enter, the girl ran to him with a big smile. "Daddy, you're home early." David picked her up, twirling her once before putting her down. Sophie's laughter was always the best medicine after a long day. "I thought we could have dinner together tonight," he said, loosening his tie. "How about it?" "Cool, can I choose what we eat?" Sophie asked, bouncing around him. "Of course, princess. What do you want?" "Spaghetti with meatballs." "Great choice." After dismissing Mr. Peterson, David took a quick shower and changed from his suit into more comfortable clothes. In the kitchen, he and Sophie worked together to prepare dinner. He handled the sauce and meatballs while she set the table, placing the cutlery with the precision of someone on an important mission. During dinner, Sophie chatted about her day at school, music class where she played the xylophone, the drawing she made in art class, the boy who put a worm on the teacher's desk. David listened attentively, asking questions and laughing at the stories, but noticed that something seemed to be distracting his daughter. After finishing recounting the class trip to the zoo next week, Sophie suddenly fell silent, playing with the spaghetti on her plate. "Is everything all right, honey?" David asked. Sophie looked up, her expression serious, something rare for the usually animated girl. "Daddy, where do you think Emily is right now?" The question took David by surprise. He hadn't expected his daughter to still be thinking about the girl they met earlier. "I'm not sure, Sophie. She said she lives on the street," Sophie continued, her voice small. "Does that mean she doesn't have a bed or toys, or anyone to read her stories before bed?" David felt a pang in his chest. He had explained to Sophie in simple terms what it meant for someone to be homeless, but it seemed that only now was the reality of it hitting the girl. "Probably not, honey. Emily doesn't have the same things we have," Sophie frowned, seemingly processing the information. "But she's so smart, Daddy. She taught me math better than the teacher. And she was kind to me even though she didn't know me." "Yes, she seems like a very special girl," David agreed, remembering the maturity with which Emily had spoken, the politeness with which she had thanked him for the snack, the patient way she had taught Sophie. "It's not fair," Sophie declared suddenly, putting her fork down on the table with surprising force for a 5-year-old. "It's not fair that she doesn't have a home and we have such a big one." David looked at his daughter, surprised by the indignation in her voice. "Life isn't always fair, Sophie. But we can do something to help, can't we?" Sophie's eyes lit up at the possibility. "We have that empty room, and lots of toys I don't even use anymore. And you always say we should help those in need." David smiled slightly. That was something Claire always said, the importance of helping others when you have privileges. It was comforting to see that Sophie had absorbed that value, even at such a young age. "Helping others is important." "Yes," he agreed. "So we can help Emily," Sophie insisted. "Can we give her food and clothes, and maybe she could come live with us?" David almost choked on the wine he was drinking. "Sophie, it's not that simple. There are laws, procedures. We can't just bring a child to live with us." "Why not?" The childlike logic challenged the complexities of the adult world. "She has no one. We have space. And I've always wanted a sister." David took a deep breath. How to explain the legal and social complexities involved to a 5-year-old? How to talk about child protective services, adoption processes, background checks, and all the other bureaucratic complications? "There are people whose job it is to help children like Emily," he began. "Social workers, institutions." "But she said she doesn't like it when adults tell her what to do and then disappear," Sophie reminded him. "Remember, she said that. She doesn't trust adults." David remembered clearly. The phrase had stayed in his mind, along with the resigned expression on Emily's face as she uttered it. A 5-year-old child shouldn't know that kind of distrust. "I remember, yes. What if she doesn't want to go to those institutions? What if they're not as nice as you?" David had no answer for that. The truth was that the foster care system for abandoned children was far from perfect. He knew this reality well from his work as a lawyer. He had dealt with cases involving the adoption system and was aware of the flaws, the long waits, the overcrowded institutions. "Daddy," Sophie continued when he didn't reply, "Mommy would want to help Emily. She always helped everyone." The mention of Claire hit David like a punch to the stomach. It was true, his late wife had a huge heart and was always involved in social causes. She wouldn't hesitate to help someone like Emily. Your mother had a very kind heart, he agreed softly. Just like yours, Sophie said with childlike simplicity. You have a kind heart too, Daddy. That's why I know we're going to help Emily. Something stirred within David, an emotion he couldn't quite name. He looked at his daughter, so small and yet so wise in her own way. The conviction in her eyes, so similar to Claire's, was impossible to ignore. Let's think of something, okay? He finally said. Maybe we can start by bringing her food and clothes if we find her again. Sophie's face lit up. Can we look for her tomorrow, please, Daddy? David thought about his packed schedule, his booked meetings, his tight deadlines. I have a lot of work tomorrow, Sophie. The girl's smile disappeared. But Emily might be cold or hungry. Sophie's simple words weighed more than any elaborate argument. David felt something shift within him, a decision forming without him fully realizing it. I'll see what I can do, he replied, surprising himself. Later, after putting Sophie to bed and reading her favorite story, David sat in his office with a glass of whiskey. On the wall was a photo of Claire holding newborn Sophie, her face radiant with happiness. What would you do, Claire? He murmured to the silent image, a 5-year-old girl living on the streets. There was no answer, of course, but in his heart, David knew what Claire would say. She always followed her moral compass, even when the path wasn't the easiest. He opened his laptop and began researching child protection laws, temporary foster care processes, and adoption requirements. Hours passed as he absorbed information, considered possibilities, weighed options. Somewhere in the city, Emily was probably curled up in her makeshift shelter, alone under the starry sky. The thought made his stomach clench. Before going to bed, David sent a message to his secretary. I need to reschedule tomorrow morning's appointments. Urgent family matter. The seed Sophie had planted was quietly beginning to sprout. The morning arrived cloudy and cold. David dropped Sophie off at school earlier than usual, with a lunchbox especially packed with extra sandwiches and an extra juice bottle. What's all this for, Daddy? Sophie asked, curious. You never know who might be hungry, he replied with a wink. Sophie smiled, understanding immediately. Are you going to look for Emily today? David nodded. I'm going to try. I don't know if I'll find her, but I'll do my best. You'll find her, Sophie stated with the absolute confidence only children possess. And when you do, tell her I saved my blue dress for her. It's my favorite, but I think it'll look pretty on her. David felt a warmth in his chest upon hearing his daughter's spontaneous generosity. I'll tell her. Now go, the teacher is waiting. After watching Sophie enter the school, David didn't go to the office as usual. Instead, he drove to the outskirts of the area where they had found Emily. He parked his car and began to walk, carefully observing parks, alleys, awnings, anywhere a small child might shelter. Hours passed without success. David asked local shopkeepers if they had seen a small girl with brown hair, usually alone. Some shook their heads negatively. Others mentioned having seen such a child now and then, but no one knew where to find her. By noon, David was frustrated and worried. What if he didn't find her? What if something had happened to her? The city was big and dangerous for a child alone. That's when he decided to go back to where it all began, the school surroundings. Maybe Emily was in her usual spot, watching the children through the fence, but she wasn't there. The little corner behind the tree from where she used to watch was empty. David expanded his search, walking through the adjacent streets. It was in a narrow alley, behind a bakery, that he finally found her. Emily was sleeping curled up between strategically piled cardboard boxes, forming a kind of makeshift shelter. Her worn backpack served as a pillow, and she was covered by a thin, faded blanket. Even asleep, her face maintained an alert expression, as if ready to wake up and flee at the slightest sign of danger. David approached cautiously, not wanting to scare her. He crouched at a safe distance. "Emily," he called softly. "Emily, it's David, Sophie's dad." The girl's eyes opened instantly, wide with fear. Upon recognizing David, her expression changed to surprise, then suspicion. "What are you doing here?" she asked. sitting up quickly and smoothing her wrinkled dress. "I was looking for you," David answered honestly. "Sophie and I were worried." Emily frowned, confused. Worried? Why? The question took David by surprise. The idea that no one had worried about her for so long that the concept seemed strange broke his heart. "Because we care about you," he said simply, "and we wanted to make sure you were okay." Emily looked at him in silence, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. "I'm fine," she finally said, but her small voice betrayed the statement. David noticed she was trembling slightly in the cold morning air. Her dress, the same as the day before, had new stains, and her bare feet were dirty. "Emily," David began, choosing his words carefully, "Sophie and I would like to invite you to stay with us for a while." The girl's eyes widened. "Stay at your house?" "Yes. We have a spare room. You'd have a comfortable bed, warm food, clean clothes, and Sophie would be very happy to have your company." Emily looked suspicious, as if expecting some trap. "Why? Why would you do that?" "Because no one should live like this, especially a smart child like you," David answered sincerely. "And because Sophie and I would be happy to help." Emily was silent for a long moment, thoughtful. "It wouldn't be forever," she finally said. "Adults always say they'll help, but then they change their minds." The cynical maturity in her voice was painful to hear. "I can't promise forever right now," David replied honestly. "But I can promise that while you're with us, you'll be treated with respect and care, and that we won't make any decisions about you without talking to you first." Emily seemed to consider the offer, the conflict clear on her young face, the desire for security fighting against the fear of trusting and being disappointed again. "Can I bring my books?" she finally asked, pointing to her backpack. David smiled, feeling a wave of relief. "That's the first thing you'll bring," he assured her. Still hesitant, Emily began gathering her few belongings, carefully putting them in her backpack. David noticed that besides the books, she only had a few pieces of clothing, all in similar condition to the dress she was wearing. On the way to the car, Emily walked a little behind David, as if still ready to flee if necessary. But when he opened the car door for her, the girl got in without protest. "Now we're going to pick up Sophie from school," David explained. "I shall be very happy to see you." At school, Sophie waited in the playground with the other children. When she saw her father's car, she ran towards it. Then she noticed Emily in the passenger seat, and her eyes widened with joy. "Emily!" she exclaimed, jumping with excitement. "Daddy found you! Are you coming to our house?" Emily looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "For now," Emily replied cautiously. "How cool." Sophie hugged her father's legs. "Thank you, Daddy." The ride home was filled with Sophie's animated chatter, telling Emily about her room, her toys, the books they could read together. Emily responded with monosyllables, still trying to process the sudden change in her situation. The miller's house was larger than any place Emily had ever been. She stopped at the entrance, intimidated by the polished wooden stairs, the paintings on the walls, the sense of comfort and permanence that emanated from every corner. "Come on, I'll show you the bathroom," Sophie offered, taking Emily's hand. "Daddy said you can take a warm bath while he prepares lunch." The bath was a revelation for Emily. The warm water, the fragrant soap, the soft towels, simple luxuries she hadn't experienced in months. When she finished, she found clean clothes folded on a stool, a dress of Sophie's, soft socks, and even new underwear, still with the tag. Dressed and with her hair still damp, Emily followed the smell of food to the kitchen. David was preparing sandwiches and a soup that made her stomach rumble. "Just in time," he smiled. "I hope you like tomato soup." During lunch, Emily ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. Sophie talked non-stop, explaining the house routine, the rules, few, Emily noted with relief, and all the plans she had for the two of them. "And then we can study together," Sophie concluded excitedly. "You can help me with math again." After lunch, Sophie took Emily to the guest room, now temporarily hers. It was a simple but comfortable room with a twin bed covered by a blue quilt, a small desk, and a wardrobe. "Daddy said we can decorate it any way you want," Sophie explained. "How we can make drawings to put on the wall." Emily touched the soft quilt, still not quite believing it. "I've never had a room all to myself," she confessed in a low voice. "Now you do," Sophie smiled. "And look, I've put aside some of my toys and books for you. We can share." On the desk was a small pile of children's books, some toys, and a new set of colored pencils. "Are they for me?" Emily asked. Her voice choked. "Of course, and there's more in my room. We can take turns." The girls spent the afternoon together. Sophie showed her book collection and was impressed when Emily read aloud with surprising fluency for her age. Afterwards, they sat at the kitchen table to do Sophie's homework, with Emily patiently explaining the math problems. David observed the interaction between the two with a smile, noticing how Emily visibly blossomed with each passing hour, her back less tense, her face more relaxed, even a small smile appearing occasionally. That night, after dinner, David found them both in Emily's room. Sophie was already in her pajamas, sitting on the bed next to Emily, who was reading a story aloud. "Bedtime, Sophie," he said softly. "But the story is at the best part," Sophie protested. "You can continue tomorrow. Emily needs to rest too." After Sophie finally went to her own room, David came back to check on Emily. The girl was sitting on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, as if she didn't quite know what to do. "Is everything all right?" David asked. Emily nodded slowly. "It's strange," she said. "Such a big bed just for me." David smiled gently. "You'll get used to it," he assured her. "There's a pair of pajamas in the drawer. And if you need anything during the night, my room is the last one down the hall." Emily looked at him, her eyes wide and serious. "Why are you doing all this? Really?" David considered the question for a moment. "Because it's the right thing to do," he answered simply. "And because you deserve a safe place." When David left, Emily changed into her pajamas and lay down on the soft bed. The silence of the house was different from the silence of the streets. It wasn't threatening, but peaceful. There were no passing cars, no distant voices of strangers, no constant fear of being discovered. For the first time in 8 months, Emily fell asleep without fear, wrapped in clean sheets, with a full stomach and the strange, almost forgotten, feeling of safety. The Miller house, once too quiet for just 2 people, now had the voice of a new child within its walls. I It was him the first rays of sun peeked through the curtains when David woke up. Instinctively, he checked the clock, 6:30 in the morning, his usual time to start getting ready for work. But today, he paused for a moment, remembering he had a new resident in the house. Silently, he walked down the hall and stopped at the guest room door, now Emily's room. He opened the door slowly and peeked inside. The girl was sleeping soundly, curled up in the sheets like a small cocoon. Her face, relaxed in sleep, seemed even younger, reminding David how much of a child she still was, despite the maturity forced upon her by circumstances. In the kitchen, he made coffee and called his office. "Janet, I'll be working from home for the next few days," he informed his assistant. "Something important has come up in the family." "No problem, Mr. Miller. I'll reschedule your in-person meetings." David mentally thanked himself for having a position that allowed him such flexibility. As a partner at the firm, he could manage his own time, something he rarely did, always prioritizing work. But now, there was something more important. Around 7:30, he heard light footsteps on the stairs. Emily appeared at the kitchen door, already dressed in Sophie's clothes that they had set aside for her, her hair combed and her hands freshly washed. "Good morning," she said politely, as if unsure of her place in that space. "Good morning, Emily. Did you sleep well?" The girl nodded. "The bed is very soft," she commented, almost as if it was something strange. David smiled. "That's good. Are you hungry? We have cereal, toast, eggs. Anything is fine," Emily replied, still standing near the door. Come sit down. You can choose whatever you want to eat." Gradually, Emily approached the table. David noticed that she was carefully observing where everything was kept: the plates in the upper cabinet, the cutlery in the drawer, the juice in the refrigerator. Memorizing, adapting, learning the unspoken rules of that new environment. Sophie came downstairs shortly after, still in her pajamas and with messy hair, the opposite of Emily's organized appearance. "Good morning," she exclaimed excitedly, running to hug her father and then smiling at Emily. "You're already up. Did you sleep well? Do you like the room?" "Let's have breakfast together." The barrage of questions made Emily blink, but a small smile appeared on her lips. "I slept well, thank you," she replied. "The room it's very nice." Breakfast unfolded with Sophie's chatter filling the silence. Emily ate slowly, savoring each forkful of scrambled eggs, each bite of toast with jam, as if she wanted to imprint the taste in her memory. "Today is Saturday. We don't have school," Sophie explained. "We can play all day. And can you help me with my homework later? The teacher gave us math problems for Monday." "Of course," Emily agreed. "If your dad doesn't mind." "I think that's a great idea," David replied. "Actually, I have some things to take care of in my study upstairs. If you two are okay by yourselves for a few hours, I can work while you study." After breakfast, David retreated to his study upstairs but left the door ajar. From time to time, he stopped what he was doing to listen to the girls' voices coming from the living room. Around 10 in the morning, his curiosity led him to silently descend the stairs. He stopped on the last step, observing the scene in the living room without being noticed. Sophie and Emily were sitting on the rug, notebooks and books scattered around them. Sophie was frowning at a problem, while Emily patiently explained, "See, Sophie, it's like we did before. If you have 12 apples and you want to divide them equally among 4 people, you need to find out how many apples each person will get." "I know the answer is 3, Sophie replied, frustrated. "But the teacher said I need to show how I got that number." "Then let's draw it," Emily suggested. She picked up a pencil and blank paper. "Here are your 12 apples." She drew simple circles representing the fruits. "Now let's put them into 4 groups." David watched, impressed, as Emily naturally adapted her explanation when she realized Sophie wasn't understanding. She not only knew the answer, but she knew how to teach, a rare skill in anyone, let alone a 5-year-old. "I get it," Sophie exclaimed suddenly. "It's like sharing. 12 divided by 4 is 3 because each person gets 3 apples if we divide equally." "Exactly," Emily smiled. "Now try the next problem by yourself." David silently returned to his study, reflecting on what he had just witnessed. In just 2 days, Emily had already become a valuable presence in the house, not just as someone who needed help, but as someone who also had much to offer. At noon, David went downstairs to prepare lunch and found the living room transformed. The girls had finished their homework and were now playing school, with Emily as the teacher and Sophie as the diligent student. A small blackboard that Sophie had received for Christmas was propped up on the coffee table, with numbers and letters written in colorful chalk. "It's recess time, class," Emily announced in a slightly more formal voice, making Sophie burst into laughter. "I think it's lunchtime, actually," David commented, announcing his presence. The girls turned around, Sophie still laughing and Emily with a shy smile on her face. "Daddy, Emily is the best teacher in the world," Sophie declared. "She explains everything in a way that makes sense, and she doesn't get mad when I make mistakes." "I saw," David agreed, "that you two make a good team." During lunch, David noticed something he hadn't seen in a long time, Sophie eating vegetables without complaining. When the girl voluntarily took more broccoli, he couldn't hide his surprise. "Since when do you like broccoli so much?" he asked. "Emily said vegetables help your brain work better," Sophie explained naturally. "And I want to be smart like her." David exchanged an amused glance with Emily, who looked down, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. In the afternoon, while David finished some reports, sounds of laughter reached his study. He went downstairs again and found the girls in the backyard, where Sophie was showing Emily how to use the swing. "Higher, Emily! You have to kick your legs like this," Sophie demonstrated, swinging with abandon. Emily, more cautious, followed the instructions little by little, going a little higher each time. Suddenly, when she reached a considerable height, a surprising sound escaped her. A clear, genuine laugh, probably the first since she arrived. David felt a lump in his throat. The sound of Emily's laughter was like music in a house that, he now realized, had been too silent for too long. The following days established a natural routine. In the morning, Emily helped Sophie get ready for school, choosing clothes, packing her backpack, reviewing homework. David drove them both to school, dropping Emily off at the front office to speak with the principal about her potential enrollment, while Sophie went to her classroom. During the day, while Sophie was in class, Emily helped David organize the house, always wanting to make herself useful. He noticed how she observed everything with attentive eyes, how he organized bills, how he operated the washing machine, how he prepared meals. "You don't have to do that, Emily," he said once, finding her meticulously folding clean clothes. "You're a child, not a maid." Emily looked at him, confused. "But I want to help. You and Sophie are letting me stay here. It's not a trade-off," David explained gently. "You don't have to pay to be here." The idea seemed strange to Emily, but little by little, she began to relax, to play more, to worry less, to accept care without feeling she needed to immediately reciprocate. In the afternoons, the living room regularly transformed into a classroom. Emily sat beside Sophie, guiding her through her homework with a mix of firmness and gentleness that reminded David of the best teachers he had known. "It's not just about memorizing the answer," Emily explained. "It's about understanding why the answer is right." "But it's easier to just remember," Sophie sometimes protested. "Easier now, harder later," Emily replied, with a wisdom that seemed impossible for her 5 years. At night, David watched the two girls during bath time. Bedtime stories, the small whispered confidences that children share. The house, once a functional place where he and Sophie merely slept and ate between appointments, had become a home again, filled with curious questions, unexpected laughter, daily small discoveries. And at the center of this transformation was Emily, visibly blossoming each day. Her shoulders less tense, her face more expressive, her voice stronger. Like a plant finally finding sun after a long time in the shade. On the third night, after the girls had gone to sleep, David sat in his study with a cup of coffee. On the wall, Claire's photo seemed to smile at him. "You would have liked her," he murmured to the image of his late wife. "She reminds me of you, you know." The same determination, the same kindness. As he finished his coffee, David made a decision that, in truth, had already been formed since the moment he found Emily sleeping among boxes. It was time to make things official. A week had passed since Emily arrived at the Miller's house, a week that transformed the family's routine in ways David could never have predicted. That Saturday morning, David woke before dawn. The silence of the house was comforting. He knew that in the rooms down the hall, the two girls were sleeping soundly. He got up quietly and went to his study, where he turned on his computer and opened a file he had started days ago, simply titled Emily. The document contained notes on adoption procedures, legal requirements, and contacts of colleagues specialized in family law. David had been researching quietly, in moments when the girls were asleep or engrossed in their games. Taking a sip of coffee, David contemplated the situation he found himself in. 3 weeks ago, his life followed a predictable course: work, Sophie, the responsibilities of a single father balancing career and raising a daughter. Now, he was seriously considering expanding his family, permanently bringing into his life a child he had met by chance. It was a huge decision, one that would change everything forever. And yet it felt strangely natural, as if Emily had always been destined to be a part of their lives. "I'm getting sentimental," he murmured to himself, smiling slightly. But it wasn't just sentimentalism. As a lawyer, David had always been pragmatic, analytical, and objectively analyzing. Emily's presence had been beneficial for everyone. Sophie was happier, more engaged in her studies, learning values of empathy and generosity that no school could teach so effectively. The house itself seemed more alive, filled with an energy that had been missing since Claire's death. And Emily's transformation was remarkable. The cautious, distrustful girl of the first few days was gradually giving way to a more relaxed child, more willing to smile, to ask questions, to take up space. Her surprising knowledge and maturity remained, but now came accompanied by genuine moments of childlike joy. David opened his calendar and checked the next week's appointments. There was an important meeting on Monday he couldn't postpone, but his Tuesday was relatively free. He set a reminder: Call Michael, 10 a.m. Michael Hernandez was an old college colleague who specialized in family law, particularly adoption cases. It's the first step, David said to himself, closing his laptop. Light footsteps in the hallway announced that one of the girls had woken up. Moments later, Emily appeared at the study door, already dressed and with her hair combed. "Good morning," she said politely. "May I come in?" "Of course," David smiled. "You're up early today." Emily entered the study, her eyes scanning the bookshelves with barely disguised admiration. "I always wake up early," she replied. "Can I help make breakfast?" This had been a constant since Emily arrived, her insistence on helping, on contributing, as if she needed to justify her presence. David and Sophie had tried to explain that she didn't need to pay to be there, but old habits are hard to break. "Of course," David agreed, standing up. "Sophie will probably sleep for another hour. She loves to stay in bed on Saturdays." In the kitchen, they worked side by side in an already familiar routine. Emily set the table while David fried eggs and toasted bread. The girl moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to taking care of herself, but there was a lightness in her movements that wasn't there when she arrived. "David," she said suddenly, using his name, something that still sounded formal coming from such a small child, but which was progress from the Mr. Miller of the first few days. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied, flipping the eggs in the frying pan. "When will I have to leave?" The question took David by surprise. He turned off the stove and faced her. "Why do you think you have to leave?" Emily shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "Because that's how it works. Good things don't last." The simplicity of the statement, the resigned acceptance in her voice, clenched David's heart. "Emily," he said softly, crouching down to her height, "you can stay here for as long as you want and need. We're not expecting you to leave." Emily finally looked at him, her large eyes searching for signs of lies or deception. "Really, even if it's for a very long time?" David wanted to tell her then about his adoption plans, about wanting her to stay permanently, but he hesitated. The process would be complicated. There would be interviews, assessments, bureaucracy. What if, for some reason, it wasn't approved? He couldn't create false expectations only to shatter them later. "Even if it's for a very long time," he confirmed instead. "This house is your home now too, Emily." A small smile appeared on the girl's face, and she nodded, returning to arrange the cutlery on the table. The rest of the day passed quietly. The girls spent the morning playing in the backyard, enjoying the autumn sun. After lunch, when Emily was helping Sophie with a science project for school, David retreated to his study again. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in some time. "Hello, Patricia," he said when the call was answered. "This is David Miller. I know it's Saturday, but I needed to speak with you about a professional matter." Patricia Chen was a social worker David had worked with on a few cases over the years. If there was anyone who could guide him through the adoption process with knowledge and discretion, it was her. The conversation lasted almost an hour. David explained the situation, how they found Emily, her situation of abandonment, the lack of any known relatives, her surprisingly natural adaptation to life with them. "I won't lie, David, it will be a complex process," Patricia explained, "especially because there's no formal record of abandonment or entry into the system. But it's not impossible. First, we'll need to formally register her situation, search for relatives, and then you can request temporary guardianship while the adoption process proceeds." "How long would all this take?" "Realistically, months, maybe a year or more. But the fact that you're already caring for her and are a respected lawyer with a stable financial situation helps a lot." David asked a few more questions about the next steps, carefully noting the answers. When he hung up, he felt simultaneously anxious and determined. The path would be long, but it was worth walking. Downstairs, he heard laughter. He approached the stairs silently and saw Emily and Sophie sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by books and craft supplies. They were building what looked like a model of the solar system, with styrofoam balls painted in different colors. "Mars is red because it has a lot of iron oxide on its surface," Emily explained, applying red paint to one of the spheres. "It's like rust. How do you know so much about planets?" Sophie asked, genuinely impressed. I read it in a book I found, Emily replied simply. It was from the library, but someone threw it away because some pages were torn. David felt that familiar mix of admiration and sadness. Emily's intelligence and resilience were extraordinary, but the circumstances that forced the development of those qualities had been too harsh for a child. That night, after dinner, David was working on his laptop in the living room while the girls watched a children's movie on television. When the end credits began to roll, Sophie yawned and leaned against Emily's shoulder. "Time to brush your teeth and go to bed," David announced, closing his computer. "Just 5 more minutes, Daddy," Sophie negotiated, as she did every night. 5 minutes, he agreed with a smile. "I'll go upstairs to prepare the bath." As David went upstairs, Sophie turned to Emily, who was tidying the scattered cushions on the sofa. "Emily," she said confidentially, "do you like living here with us?" Emily stopped what she was doing, considering the question. "I like it very much," she answered honestly. "Your house is beautiful, and you and your dad are very kind to me." "Our house," Sophie corrected. "Not my house. Our house now." Emily smiled shyly. "It's strange to think that, having a real home. But you like it, right? Being here with us?" "Yes," Emily confirmed. "I like it very much." Sophie seemed satisfied with the answer. She was silent for a moment, as if gathering courage, and then, "I'm going to ask Daddy if you can stay with us forever." Emily's eyes widened. "Sophie, don't do that. Your dad is already doing so much by letting me stay here for a while. I don't want to bother him more." "It's not a bother. It's nice having you here. Daddy thinks so too. He smiles a lot more now." Before Emily could protest again, Sophie stood up and ran upstairs. Emily followed her hesitantly, stopping halfway up the stairs when she heard voices coming from the bathroom, where David was preparing the bathtub. "Daddy," Sophie's voice sounded determined, "can I ask you something important?" "Of course, Princess. What is it?" "Can Emily stay with us forever?" There was a pause. Emily held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Part of her wanted to run, not to hear the answer, to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment, but her feet remained glued to the step. "If she wants to, yes," came David's answer, simple and direct. Emily covered her mouth with her hand, too surprised to move. "Really?" Sophie's voice was full of hope. "She won't have to leave." "No, Sophie. I'm working to make sure Emily can stay with us permanently if that's what she wants. Like an adoption, like in the movies." "Yes, something like that. But it's a complicated process, and it takes time. That's why I haven't mentioned anything yet. I don't want to create expectations before I'm sure. But you really want her to stay forever?" "Yes, Sophie. In just 1 week. I can't imagine our family without her anymore." Emily felt a tear run down her face, followed by another and another. Family. The word echoed in her mind like a promise almost too big to believe. "I've always wanted a sister," Sophie declared with the direct sincerity of children. "I know, honey, and it looks like your wish might come true. But remember, this is between us for now, okay? There are still many things to sort out before we can talk to Emily." "Okay, Daddy. It'll be our secret." Emily retreated silently, descending the stairs without a sound. She sat on the bottom step, trying to process what she had just heard. David wanted to adopt her. He wanted her to stay permanently, to be part of their family. After so much time alone, after so many nights feeling like she belonged nowhere and to no one, the idea of a permanent home, of a family, seemed almost impossible to grasp. She heard footsteps approaching and quickly wiped her tears. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs. "Emily, what are you doing down there? Come on, Daddy said we can take a bath together today." Emily stood up, forcing a smile to hide her emotion. "I'm coming," she replied, climbing the steps again. As she passed the bathroom door, her gaze met David's. For an instant, she had the impression that he knew she had overheard the conversation. There was a softness in his eyes, a quiet certainty that made her feel safe. Later, in bed, Emily looked at the ceiling of her room. No longer the guest room in her mind, but her room. Through the window, she could see a piece of the starry sky. She remembered how many nights she had spent looking at those same stars from very different places. Dark alleys, cold awnings, makeshift shelters. Now, wrapped in clean sheets, with a full stomach and a lighter heart than she could remember ever feeling, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, good things could last. On the hallway wall, in a photo Emily had noticed on the first day, Claire Miller smiled as if silently approving the expansion of her family. And in the master bedroom, David was finishing an email to Michael Hernandez, his friend and family law specialist. "I need your guidance to initiate an adoption process. The girl in question is named Emily. She's 5 years old, and she has already transformed our lives in ways we never imagined possible. I want to do this right, with all the care and responsibility she deserves. Can we meet on Tuesday? This is the most important decision I've made since I decided to marry Claire." He sent the email and closed his laptop. In the hallway, he checked that Sophie was sleeping deeply, her face serene, a small smile on her lips. In the room next door, Emily had also fallen asleep, one hand firmly holding the book she was reading before bed. David adjusted the blanket over her and quietly left, leaving the door ajar as she preferred. A sense of peace enveloped him, the quiet certainty that he was doing exactly what he should be doing. The seed planted by Sophie had blossomed into a decision he had never expected to make, but which now seemed the only possible one. Tejas indeed chima fundos. The morning was clear, when David parked his car in front of the imposing building where Michael Hernandez, his old college colleague and now respected family law attorney, kept his office. Emily's adoption process had officially begun 2 weeks prior, and this was the first follow-up meeting. The secretary led David to Michael's office, who greeted him with a firm handshake and a welcoming smile. "How are the girls?" Michael asked, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. "Surprisingly well," David replied, settling in. "It's as if Emily has always been part of the family. Sophie treats her like a sister from day one, and Emily, well, she's blossoming in a way I didn't imagine was possible so quickly." Michael smiled, pleased, but his expression soon turned more serious. He opened a folder on the desk and adjusted his glasses. "David, we've done the preliminary investigations into Emily's legal situation," he began, scanning the documents. "We located her birth certificate and confirmed the passing of Rebecca Jenkins, her biological mother." "That's good, isn't it? It simplifies the adoption process, correct?" Michael hesitated, and David immediately felt that something wasn't right. "For the most part, yes, but we found something that complicates the situation a bit." He slid a document across the table. "Emily has a living maternal grandmother, Margaret Jenkins, 65 years old, residing in Ridgewood, about an hour from here." David picked up the paper, feeling as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. A grandmother, someone with blood ties to Emily, someone with priority legal rights. "Emily never mentioned a grandmother," he said, more to himself than to Michael. "So it's possible she didn't know about her existence, or that they lost touch a long time ago," Michael explained. "But legally, we need to notify Miss Jenkins about the adoption process. As a direct blood relative, she has priority in the matter of custody, unless she formally waives that right." David nodded slowly, understanding the situation as a lawyer, but feeling growing anxiety as Emily's potential father. "What if she wants custody?" he asked, his voice lower than he intended. "The court will consider various factors: the grandmother's age, her financial and health conditions, and most importantly, Emily's best interest. The fact that the girl is already adjusted to your home and has a bond with you and Sophie will be taken into account." Michael paused. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to contact Ms. Jenkins." On the way back home, David wrestled with conflicting feelings. As a lawyer, he perfectly understood the need to contact all biological relatives before proceeding with an adoption. As a father, he feared losing the girl he already considered part of his family. That night, he watched Emily and Sophie playing in the living room, building a fort with cushions and blankets. Emily's laughter, once so rare, now regularly filled the house. How could he explain to her that there was a grandmother who might want to take her away? He decided not to say anything until he had more information. He didn't want to cause unnecessary anxiety in Emily, who had already faced too much abandonment in her short life. The next day, after dropping the girls off at school, Emily was informally attending some classes while the official documents were processed. David drove to Ridgewood, following the address provided by Michael. Margaret Jenkins' house was modest but well kept, with a small front garden where roses were beginning to bloom despite the late autumn. With a racing heart, David rang the doorbell. After a few moments, a grey-haired lady answered the door. She had piercing blue eyes that immediately reminded him of Emily's, observant, intelligent, with a certain wariness. "Ms. Jenkins?" "Margaret Jenkins. Yes, that's me." She examined him with curiosity. "How can I help you?" "My name is David Miller. I'd like to talk about your daughter, Rebecca, and your granddaughter, Emily." Margaret's face visibly paled. She leaned against the doorframe. "Rebecca, do you have news of her?" Her voice trembled with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Can we talk inside?" David asked gently. The living room was simple but cozy, with well-preserved antique furniture and many photographs on the walls. David noticed a smiling teenager in several of them, presumably Rebecca, Emily's mother. Sitting on the sofa, David carefully explained the situation, how he had found Emily, the circumstances of Rebecca's death, the girl's current situation living with him and Sophie, and the adoption process he wished to initiate. Margaret listened in silence, tears streaming freely down her wrinkled face. "Rebecca dead, and a granddaughter I never knew existed." She shook her head, incredulous. "I always knew something terrible had happened when I lost contact with my daughter. But this... I'm sorry to bring you this news," David said sincerely. Margaret wiped her tears with a cloth handkerchief she pulled from her pocket. "Rebecca and I had a fight," she finally explained, her voice choked. "She was only 19, full of dreams and plans. She wanted to move to the big city, live her own life. I tried to stop her. I was too harsh." She sighed deeply. Terrible words were said by both of us. Rebecca walked out the door swearing I'd never see or hear from her again. And she kept her promise. "Did you try to find her?" David asked gently. "In the first few years, constantly. I even hired a private detective, but Rebecca had completely disappeared. After a while, the pain and the pride." She let the sentence trail off. "I never imagined she would have had a daughter." "My goodness, a granddaughter. Emily is 5 years old," David offered. "She's an extraordinary girl, smart, polite, resilient in a way no child should ever have to be." Margaret looked at the photos of Rebecca on the wall. "What is she like? Physically, I mean, does she look like Rebecca?" "She has the same eyes," David replied. "The same observant expression. And the same determination, I'd say." A silence fell over the room as Margaret processed all the information. Finally, she turned to David. "Mr. Miller, do I understand correctly that you are here because, legally, as her maternal grandmother, I would have priority in the matter of Emily's custody?" David nodded. "Yes. Before proceeding with adoption, the law requires that all close relatives be notified and that it be verified whether they wish to assume custody." Margaret was silent for another moment, reflecting. "And how is Emily doing with you and your daughter? Does she seem happy?" "I believe so," David replied honestly. "So at first she was very cautious, as if expecting to be sent away at any moment. But little by little she's opening up, laughing more, making plans for the future. She and my daughter, Sophie, have become inseparable." Margaret stood up and walked to the bookshelf, picking up a framed photograph. It was teenage Rebecca, smiling broadly as she held a trophy. "A Rebecca at 15, Aunt," she explained. "She won a science fair at school." Sitting back down, Margaret looked directly at David. "Mr. Miller, I appreciate your honesty and for coming to tell me all this personally. As for the matter of custody," she took a deep breath. "I am 65 years old, live alone on a small pension, and have health issues. I am not in a position to adequately raise a child, and even if I were, it wouldn't be fair to uproot Emily from a home where she has finally found stability." David felt immense relief, but maintained a neutral expression. "I understand. However," Margaret continued, leaning slightly forward, "I would very much like to meet her. To be a part of her life, even if only as an occasional visiting grandmother, if that is possible. Absolutely, David replied without hesitation. In fact, I think it would be important for Emily to know her family history, to know where she comes from. Margaret's face lit up with hope. You would allow that? Even knowing that legally I could complicate the adoption process. Miss Jenkins, David said firmly, I'm here because I want what's best for Emily, and I believe that knowing her grandmother, her family history, is part of that. 2 days later, David sat down with Emily in the living room and carefully explained about the discovery of her grandmother. The girl listened in silence, her large eyes fixed on David's face, processing each word. So my mother had a mother, she finally said, as if testing the idea. Yes, we all do, David replied gently, and she wants to meet me. Why? Because you are her daughter's daughter, because you are part of her family. Emily frowned, thoughtful. Will she want me to live with her? David noticed the barely disguised fear in the question. No, Emily, Margaret understands that your home is here now, with us. She just wants to meet you, maybe be a part of your life as your grandmother. Emily seemed to reflect deeply on this, her small face serious as it usually got when she was solving a difficult problem. Emma, can I think about it? She finally asked. Of course, David replied, surprised once again by her maturity. Take all the time you need. It was Sophie, in the end, who convinced Emily to meet her grandmother. If she's your grandma, then she's like a grandma to me too, isn't she? Sophie asked during breakfast, 2 days after the initial conversation. I've never had a grandma, it could be fun. Emily looked at Sophie, then at David. I think I want to meet her, she finally decided. The following Sunday, David took Emily to meet Margaret. Sophie had insisted on coming along, but David explained that this first meeting should be more intimate. When they arrived at the house in Ridgewood, Emily held David's hand tightly, a rarity for the usually so independent girl. Margaret opened the door, her eyes immediately finding Emily's. For a moment, the two just looked at each other, grandmother and granddaughter, recognizing something familiar in each other despite never having met before. Hello, Emily, Margaret finally said, her voice soft and a little shaky. I'm Margaret, your grandmother. Emily didn't reply immediately, studying the woman's face with the intensity that was her trademark. You have her eyes, she finally said. My mother's. Margaret smiled through tears. And you have her smile. Exactly the same. The beginning was awkward, as was to be expected. Sitting in the living room, Margaret showed Emily photos of Rebecca at different ages, told stories of her childhood, answered Emily's hesitant questions. Gradually, the atmosphere relaxed. Emily began to ask more questions, eagerly absorbing every new piece of information about her mother. When Margaret mentioned that Rebecca loved to draw and sing, Emily's eyes sparkled. She used to sing to me every night, she shared, her first spontaneous offer of information, even when we didn't have a good place to stay. Margaret wiped away a tear. She had a beautiful voice since she was little. She won school contests. Before they left, Margaret handed Emily a small carved wooden box. These are some things that belonged to your mother when she was your age, she explained. So I thought you'd like to have them. Inside the box was a small children's bracelet, some colorful hair ribbons, a diary with the first pages filled with Rebecca's childlike handwriting, and a photo of her at 5 years old, smiling with missing front teeth, just like Emily. Thank you, Emily said, holding the box with reverence. On their way out, Margaret discreetly pulled David aside. Your lawyer sent me some documents, she said, handing him an envelope, about the formal relinquishment of custody. I've already signed everything. David looked at the envelope, surprised by the quickness of her decision. Are you sure about this? Margaret looked at Emily, who was waiting by the car, still examining the contents of the box. Absolutely. Emily has found a home with you. It would be selfish of me to try and change that now. She smiled, sad but resolute. But I'm very happy to be able to be a part of her life from now on, if you'll allow it. Of course we allow it, David assured her. In the following weeks, the adoption process moved with surprising speed. Margaret's formal relinquishment of custody removed the main legal obstacle. There were more visits from social workers, more documents to fill out, more interviews. But now, with a sense of positive inevitability, Margaret became a regular presence in the family's life, visiting on Sundays and occasionally having dinner with them. To David's surprise, Sophie developed a special affection for the elderly woman, calling her Grandma Maggie from the very first meeting, a title the woman accepted with tears in her eyes. Finally, on a sunny Wednesday, David, Sophie, and Emily attended the final adoption hearing. Emily wore a new blue dress and had her hair carefully styled by Sophie, who had insisted on putting small, sparkly clips in it for good luck. Margaret was also present, sitting in the front row, smiling encouragingly. The judge, a middle-aged man with a kind expression, addressed Emily directly during the proceedings. "Emily, do you understand what's happening today?" Emily nodded, serious. "Mr. Miller will officially be my dad, and Sophie, my sister." "And do you want that?" "More than anything," she replied with a conviction that brought tears to David's eyes. When the judge finally declared the adoption complete and officially announced Emily Miller as the girl's new name, Sophie couldn't contain her excitement. "Now we're real sisters," she exclaimed, hugging Emily so tightly she almost knocked her over. Emily returned the hug, a genuine smile lighting her face as she looked at David, then at Margaret, who watched the scene with a mix of joy and a gentle longing for what might have been. Emily's first official day of school was scheduled for the following week. David had completed all the necessary paperwork, bought her uniform, school supplies, and everything else she would need. The night before, he found Emily in her room, meticulously arranging her new backpack. Each pencil, each notebook, each book was positioned with absolute care. Her uniform hung on the closet door, perfectly pressed. "Nervous about tomorrow?" David asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Emily shrugged, trying to appear indifferent, but her restless fingers betrayed her anxiety. "What if the other kids notice I'm different?" she finally asked, her voice small. "That I didn't belong anywhere before. That I used to stand outside, just watching." "Emily," David began gently, "everyone is different in some way. And as for belonging," he smiled, "you belong to this family now. You're a Miller, just as much as Sophie and I." At that moment, Sophie appeared at the door, still in her pajamas, her hair messy. "What are you talking about?" "Emily's a little nervous about school tomorrow," David explained. Sophie immediately entered the room and sat next to Emily. "You don't need to be nervous," she declared, with the unwavering confidence of a 5-year-old. "You're my sister. There's nothing to be ashamed of." Emily looked at Sophie, surprised by the simplicity and strength of that statement. "Your sister," she repeated softly. "Forever," Sophie confirmed. "And I'll be by your side the whole time. If anyone's mean to you, I'll—" She made a fierce face that made Emily giggle. The next morning, David took the two girls to school. Emily, wearing her new uniform, impeccable white shirt, navy blue skirt, white socks, and shiny black shoes, looked like a completely different being from the girl in worn clothes who used to watch the school through the fence. When they arrived at the main entrance, Emily hesitated for a moment, looking at the large building that for so long had been only a distant dream. "Ready?" David asked. Emily took a deep breath, took Sophie's hand, and nodded. "Ready." Together, the two girls walked through the front door, Emily no longer a silent observer from the other side of the fence, but as a student, as a Miller, as someone who finally belonged. That night, the family had dinner together, with Margaret as a special guest to celebrate Emily's first day at school. The girl excitedly talked about her teacher, her new classmates, and how she had surprised everyone by easily solving math problems that the rest of the class found difficult. "And the teacher said she's never seen anyone learn so fast," Sophie exclaimed, proud of her sister. "Emily already knows everything from the first semester." "Don't exaggerate, Sophie," Emily murmured, blushing slightly, but visibly pleased. "I think we might need to talk about skipping a grade," David commented, smiling. "If you keep this up." After dinner, when Margaret had left and Sophie was taking a bath, David found Emily in her room. She was at her desk, carefully writing in a new notebook. "What are you doing?" he asked. Emily showed him the notebook. On the cover, in neat handwriting, she had written, "A property of Emily Miller." "I never had anything with my name on it before," she explained. "I mean, my new name." David sat beside her, moved by the seemingly simple gesture, yet loaded with meaning. "Do you like your new name?" Emily thought for a moment. "I like it. But I'm still me. Only now." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Now I'm me with a family." David hugged her, feeling the small body relax against his, a sign of trust that had taken weeks to develop. "Yes, you are, and you always will be." Later, after the girls were asleep, David paused in the hallway between their two rooms, listening to their soft, regular breaths. In a few months, his life had completely changed. The house, once too quiet, now overflowed with life, with questions, with daily discoveries. From Emily's room came a satisfied sigh, the sound of someone sleeping deeply, without fear, without cold, without hunger. The sound of a child who had finally found her place in the world. The girl who watched the school from outside the fence now slept safely within it, with a new name, a family, and a future full of possibilities that once seemed unattainable. On her desk, the notebook with her new name remained open, the first page already filled with her careful handwriting. "Today was my first day as Emily Miller. Today was the first day of the rest of my life." If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.